Well, let's get more on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We can speak now to the British-Australian doctor, Mohammed Mustafa, who is an emergency physician, known online to his fans and supporters as the Beast from the Middle East. That's his handle on social media. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us, Dr. Mustafa. Really appreciate it. Just first of all, could you just tell us when were you last in Gaza and how many times you've been there so far in your capacity as a doctor?
So I've been there twice as a doctor. I was there in 2024 and I was there again this year. And I left mid-April. I left this year.
All right, so you've been there really recently. I mean, people will be wondering what motivated you? What were your motivations to go there and help out?
Well, you know, I think what we're seeing with regards to the destruction and systematic dismantling of the healthcare system in Gaza, I felt as a healthcare professional and as a doctor that it was my duty to go over there and help my fellow colleagues in, this catastrophe that is Gaza right now.
How long did you stay and how did you get in and out of Gaza?
So I was there for about 5 weeks this time. We go in through the UN convoy that goes in, and you have to go in through the Jordanian crossing, through to the Alimbi crossing, through the West Bank, through Israel, and then enter through Karam Shalom crossing. So that's how most of the UN convoys go in and out of Gaza since the closure of the Rafah border.
You've described it in other media as a life-changing experience. How did it change you, Dr. Mustafa?
You know, that first night when the ceasefire broke, over 200 children were killed in an hour and a half. When you see that many children's bodies disintegrated, organs, pieces of limbs, pieces of hair, it changes your perspective on a lot of things in life. It makes all those things that you thought were an inconvenience in life seem so trivial. When you see how cheap the blood of these people in Gaza are, that hundreds of them are slaughtered every single day while we were in Gaza. It really changes your perspective and outlook on life.
Sure, I can't even begin to imagine what you've seen. I don't think anyone can compare that to anything they've experienced in their own lives, apart from people probably in Gaza. What were your first impressions when you got there? I mean, you've been brought up in the UK and in Australia, I'm told. Do correct me if I'm wrong. What were your first impressions when you got to a hospital in the middle of a war zone? Let's say on this latest visit, what struck you first?
Do you know, we didn't even have a ventilator in the emergency department. There was essentially no analgesia as well, which is painkillers. And these are very basic necessities. There wasn't even a thermometer as well in the department. So, you know, children were coming in with skin infections because of living out in tents and the lack of hygiene equipment and the lack of hygiene products. And we couldn't even measure whether they had a temperature or not. We couldn't check people's sugar levels because we didn't have glucose sticks. When people would come in and they would have heart attacks or they would have explosive injuries, we couldn't even put them in a medically induced coma with a ventilator. You know, we were asking families to bagging mask their relatives to blow air into their lungs via a balloon because we just didn't have ventilators. We had only a limited number of oxygen cylinders, and those oxygen cylinders would run out. And, you know, when the Baptist hospital was bombed a couple of days after I left, when they tried to get out one of those patients that was in a medically induced coma, the oxygen cylinder ran out as they evacuated him, and that child, who was a child, died on the streets of Gaza because there was no oxygen.
So obviously the hospitals are in a terrible condition. Hardly got any of the resources you would expect a hospital to have by the sounds of things. I mean, what was your day-to-day role? What did your day look like when you were there?
Well, I'm an emergency physician, so I'm in the emergency department, and because there's essentially no primary healthcare left in Gaza, my role was to support and see whatever came through that front door, whether that was somebody who had a sprained ankle, whether that was someone who had a cough, whether that was someone who had their limbs missing, whether that was someone who had their jaw blown off, whether that was someone that was riddled in bullets. My job was the front line. I was there to pretty much pick up any pieces or any situation I had to deal with.
And during your downtime, I mean, I don't imagine you had a lot of downtime. Sounds like you were working around the clock. But what were your sort of coping mechanisms to try to process what you'd seen every day and try to relax or sleep at least?
You know, the doctors in Gaza and the healthcare workers, they're suffering from compassion fatigue. They're exhausted of dealing with these mass casualty events day in, day out. That you know, it's almost a struggle for them when they see more death. For them to rush, you know, we're rushing the international doctors to see all of these injured people. The Gaza doctors are rushing as well, but they are much slower paced because they are exhausted and they're fatigued. And I think what motivated me when I was there and what kind of got to me was I need to help the healthcare workers as much as I need to help these patients. These doctors have, some of them have been injured, some of them have been tortured, and, you know, been taken into captivity for months before being released. And some of them have lost family members. And they're still turning up to work every day, working 24-hour shifts. So for me, in my head, there was just no excuse. I just had to be there every day for them. There was no days off for me. It was always, what can I do to help?
And obviously you were seeing horrific injuries. You've been saying this, you've been telling us, Dr. Mustafa, about the sort of stuff you saw every day. I mean, horrific scenes. I mean, I'm assuming you haven't seen anything like that anywhere else in the world, and that no emergency room in the world could have prepared you for what you had to see there in Gaza.
I think even if we had the most fully functioning, fully equipped, fully staffed hospital in the UK or in Australia, it wouldn't deal with the mass casualty events that we were seeing in Gaza. But we were dealing with these mass casualty events without a thermometer, without painkillers, without proper dressings or bandages. You know, it was difficult. As an emergency doctor, it was difficult because people were dying and they didn't need to die. If we had the right equipment, if we had more staff, we could have saved more lives. And I think that's always been the point that's always resonated and hit home to me, is that this is a man-made disaster. The bombs are being dropped by men, and the siege that blocks this medical equipment is man-made as well. So, you know, this is what's motivated me, that if it's a man-made problem, it can be a man-made solution. And that's what we're trying to do.
I mean, I'm assuming you're still in touch with a lot of the doctors that you were working with over there. I mean, we're being told that fuel supplies are dwindling, access to clean water is becoming more of an issue. Now there's a heat wave that's set in as well. I mean, are they telling you that the situation is getting even worse than it was when you were there? And I mean, and clearly it was hellish even then.
I mean, you know, we were there when the hospitals were being bombed. When I was in it, we were there when the paramedics were executed and buried while I was there. And, you know, to think that the situation is worse than healthcare workers being executed and buried in shallow graves and hospitals being bombed, and the situation now is even worse, it kind of hits home to you how bad the situation is. You know, we've had now multiple directors of hospitals that have been killed in the last few days, along with their families. We've had entire hospitals destroyed, like the Indonesian hospital, the Turkish cancer hospital, all have been destroyed. And, you know, this is creating more and more, especially with the siege, it's creating more and more of a disaster in Gaza, a human catastrophe.
I mean, we're far away from those events, and covering the situation's particularly hard for us as journalists because we're not allowed into Gaza. So we have to rely on testimony from people like you and information that comes to us from the Israeli government. And the Israeli government tells us quite different things from what you're saying. For example, what you're saying is that most of the people you were seeing day to day, I don't know if it's just the hospital you're working in or whether this is actually the case, but you're making it sound like most of the people you're seeing were children or people who had absolutely nothing to do with any kind of, didn't pose any kind of a threat to the state of Israel. Is that what you're saying essentially?
So, you know, we were seeing children with single gunshot wounds to the head and neck, sniper wounds to the head and neck. These are targeted shots of children. We were seeing that during the ceasefire. We were seeing people who had been who had been blown up, waiting in line at a bakery for food. Right now, what we're seeing in Gaza right now is we're seeing people being gunned down as they're being funneled into cages to get food and water. And Israeli soldiers have admitted on Israeli media that they were given orders to shoot at civilians. So it's not me saying this, it's IDF soldiers are corroborating what I'm saying, which is they are shooting civilians at will.
I mean, you are a doctor, and we've spoken to a couple of doctors who've been to Gaza, and it's amazing the difference between what doctors like you tell us and what we hear from Israeli officials. And doctors are obviously very credible witnesses because we trust our doctors on the whole. Does it feel like you've got a huge responsibility now, Dr. Mustafa, to let people know the reality of what's happening there in Gaza? Do you feel that's your role now?
Well, I think so. I think, when the only Western people allowed into Gaza that are not, taken around by the IDF, but actually people there on the ground, in and amongst the civilian population and in hospitals, it is incumbent on us as medical professionals, by our oath, to speak out against crimes of humanity that are going on, and to also support our colleagues in Gaza, the healthcare workers who have been systematically targeted and killed in this conflict. So, it's not just something that I want to do. It's something that we have to do. It's something that we are obliged to do as doctors. In order for us to alleviate the suffering of those patients in Gaza, we have to advocate for them. I have to advocate for my patients. And this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to advocate for my patients so we can get them the necessary medical help that they deserve.
I mean, I'm assuming you watch the news on a regular basis and you keep up to date with what's happening in the situation, particularly the diplomatic efforts that don't seem to be delivering any results for now. What would you say are the biggest differences between what you know to be the reality from having seen it yourself and what you see on your TV screen on an average British, American, Australian TV channel?
Well, I think, there's no denying what's happening in Gaza. We're seeing the videos of people being gunned down. We're seeing videos of children with horrific injuries and missing limbs and missing heads. I think the thing that really is frightening to see is the justification for these images that we're seeing. It's not just the justification that we're seeing, but sometimes it's even the denial at the scale at which it's happening. We have got tens of thousands of dead women and children. There are estimates in the Lancet report and respected medical journals that it could be in the hundreds of thousands dead. To have people on media arguing over, chants at Glastonbury, whether that's okay or not, but whether the actual killing of 600 people is okay or not, that doesn't even receive the same media coverage. That Glastonbury period of 3 days, 600 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. Where's the outrage for those 600 people? Why is the outrage for a punk rock band and their chant? And this is, I think, the problem in the media is the real issues are not being discussed. The truth is out there, and I think everybody knows how horrific the scenes are in Gaza, but it's the constant steering of the narrative by the media, which is the problem. And that's what I try and do. I try and steer back the narrative back to the situation on the ground in Gaza, which is all of these things that are happening all around the world, and the, rise in Islamophobia and the rise of anti-Semitism. These things can all be attributed back to this conflict, this war, and we need to focus on that, because if we solve that, it will bring the temperature down all over the world, and it will bring the temperature down on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, which is something that we all want to see.
Are you noticing a shift in the narrative in terms of how the media, well, you're in the UK, so probably you're best placed to judge when it comes to the British media, but are you noticing it shift? In particular, I mean, very hard to maintain the narrative that Israeli officials give us, which is that everyone's got plenty to eat and no one's dying of starvation. I mean, when you see the pictures of emaciated children, it's very difficult to by that narrative. Are you seeing the narrative shift?
Yeah. Well, I think the mask is off. I think, since there's been a change in the American government, which has been more open about its plans for Gaza and the Riviera of Gaza, and the more openness of the Israeli government and Israeli government ministers, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, to come on and say that they want to ethnically cleanse Gaza and that there's no innocence in Gaza, and they want to put people now in a concentration camp. And I think, because they've got more brazen with the statements that they're making, public opinion has completely shifted, and that public opinion is putting pressure on governments to change their stances. And we're seeing a lot more pressure on governments, and we're seeing a lot more change in the tone of governments. But the key word is tone, not action. The tone has changed, but now we need actions to go with that tone change, because there hasn't been a change of actions. There's still the supply of weapons and arms, and there's still the diplomatic cover. And, words and rhetoric only get you so far. What we need is action. We need to stop the killing of these innocent women and children.
Do words like genocide and war crimes sound like appropriate words to be using in the context of what you saw, Dr. Mustafa?
I even think we're past the stage of war crimes and genocide. We're looking at a new age Holocaust here. We're talking about completely wiping out an entire population, moving them into concentration camps, and starving 1 million children. No education for those kids, no vaccines, the blockading of baby formula, children, the largest cohort of children amputees in the world, largest cohort per population size of orphans. There is no words to describe left what's happened in Gaza. Churches have been bombed, mosques have been bombed, hospitals have been bombed, schools have been bombed. The embryo clinic was bombed, and 4,000 embryos were destroyed. Sorry. There's nothing left, of what we can call a, targeted self-defense here. This is a complete obliteration of a people and a complete dismantling of a people, and it's gone beyond genocide now. This is final. We're talking final solution type images that we're seeing in Gaza, where we're seeing emaciated children in cages being shot down. That's what we're seeing right now. So I think, for me, I don't really like to discuss the terms genocide, Holocaust, war crimes. For me, it's irrelevant what you want to call it. The issue is that people are dying, and that's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on stopping the killing. And the words are just noise. Whether someone wants to call it a genocide or a Holocaust, it doesn't matter to me what you want to call it. But what we need to call it is we need to call it unjust and unfair and wrong. It's wrong. Whether you want to call it a genocide or not, it doesn't matter. It is wrong what is happening in Gaza. Killing women and children and starving 1 million children is wrong. And that's all that matters, really, is we just need everybody to be on the same page, to know that what's happening is wrong.
Does it feel to you like it's been risky speaking up about this? I mean, while you were in Gaza, presumably you feared for your life on more than one occasion, I'm sure. I mean, by the sounds of things, you were in a very dangerous situation. But even since you left, do you feel like, has anyone threatened you? Has anyone told you it would be advisable not to speak out on these issues?
There's been a few incidences. But, look, I think if you are scared to speak out, I totally understand. But children are dying, and somebody needs to stand up for them, and somebody needs to champion their cause. And however scary it might become for me, it's not more scary than what's happening to those children. I am not more scared than a child in Gaza who's lost their entire family, and drones are overhead and bombs are raining down on their tents. No matter what happens to me, I'm in a much better position than those people in Gaza. And therefore, I have to stand up for those people in Gaza. I have to be there as their voice, because they don't have a voice right now. So, yes, there is a lot of fear speaking up and speaking out, but I'm not doing anything heroic here. I'm just speaking truth to power, and I'm speaking for people that don't have a voice. That's all I'm trying to do.
And you're being heard. because I gather you met the Irish president recently.
Yes.
You're visible, you're audible. What sort of a welcome did you get from the Irish president? What sort of a welcome have you had from other world leaders? And what's your appeal to world leaders?
You know, it was an amazing experience meeting the Irish president, Michael Higgins. He's such a wonderful gentleman and full of knowledge. And, you know, we spoke at length over the situation. He spoke at length over the history of the conflict and the history of the various fractions. And he was very well knowledgeable and well versed in what was going on over there. And, you know, my reception has been from world leaders is that I sense that they know how horrific the situation is on the ground. I don't think anybody behind closed doors is denying what is happening on the ground in Gaza. I think there is a lot of closed door solidarity, but that's not translating into policy. I think, you know, the appeal that I have maybe for these politicians is, you know, I'm pragmatic about the solutions. I'm pragmatic about what's happening. I'm honest. And you know, I want to be solution-based rather than victim-blaming, rather than playing a victim, rather than any of these things. I want to be solution-orientated. And I think a lot of the time politicians get people coming in to their doors complaining about what's going on, which is the correct thing to do. But coming in with grievances but no actions, and I've got actions and I've got solutions that I want governments to listen to.
Just lastly, I mean, Tom, we're nearly out of time. I mean, I was amazed to read that you say you miss Gaza. I'm wondering if you're planning to go back. I just also wanted to ask you, just very briefly, how you think history is going to look back on this particular chapter.
Well, I think history's already talking to us now. I think we already are at that stage where history is already being written here. You know, the cases at the ICJ, the arrest warrants at the ICC, the human rights organizations who have all called it a genocide, the UN calling it a genocide. You know, world leaders from around the world, the whole global south, the uprising of these laws to stifle free speech and protests all around the world. I mean, we're already at a precipice where history has been made here. And those that are involved have already been judged. And I think, you know, it's incumbent on all of us right now to be on the right side of history. And the right side of history is to stop the killing of women and children. It's not a controversial statement to say. It's not controversial to say, I believe that women and children shouldn't be killed. But that's where we're at right now. So I think that's the way history is going to judge. History is going to judge us on what we did in this moment and how we fought back against this catastrophic, disastrous conflict in Gaza.
Would you go back?
I'd love to go back. I'm in the process of applying to go back. I know the difference that can be made when you're over there. I know that sometimes even if you don't have medical equipment, just being a shoulder, an arm, a hug, and some words and a bit of energy can make such a difference into an emergency department.
Okay, you've given us a lot of your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. British Australian Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you very much indeed and wish you all the very best.
Thank you.